The year is 1861. A maid enters the royal dressing chamber at Windsor. Sunlight filters through lace curtains, catching dust motes in the air like suspended secrets. Before her stands Queen Victoria stoic, veiled in mourning black. But beneath that severe exterior, beneath the silks and the jet beads, beneath the carefully constructed facade of empire and grief, lies another story. She lifts her arms, the corset unlaces, and in that single sacred moment between fabric and flesh, they're allowed a glimpse behind history's curtain. Because royal underwear wasn't just about modesty. It was about control, about concealment, about messages sewn in lace and steel that no one dared speak aloud. What did they hide? What did they endure? And how did those silken layers become both armor and prison? Today, we peel back the layers literally to two. Reveal the unseen world beneath the crown. This is the tragic story of modesty and power. They called it the Age of Modesty, but it was in truth the Age of Obsession. The Victorian court was a theater of repression and spectacle, and nothing embodied its contradictions more intimately than the royal underwear. In a world where a woman's ankle was scandalous, imagine the thrill, the terror of a corset unlaced. Yet beneath the decorum and civility of Queen Victoria's empire lay an intricate machinery of cloth and metal that both fashioned and imprisoned its women, starting at the very top. Queen Victoria herself, the figurehead of moral virtue, wore undergarments that whispered a different truth. Her bloomers were monogrammed. Her chemises, made of the softest Indian muslin, were embroidered not just with initials but with control stitched by women in colonies whose hands she would never see. Her corsets were tight, not just to shape the waist but to shape the story. There is a myth we like to tell, that the Victorians were prudish, asexual, restrained. But pry open the cedar drawers of history and you'll find love letters stained with perfume, lace edged in longing, and tight-laced bodices worn by women who smiled in public and gasped for breath in private. The royal wardrobe was no exception. The Queen's undergarments were handled only by her most trusted ladies-in-waiting, not just for propriety, but because those drawers often held more than fabric. Hidden within the folds were medicinal herbs to soothe menstrual pain, small tokens from Prince Albert, buttons, ribbons, pressed violets tucked away like holy relics of a love she could never show in public. After Albert's death, Victoria's black mourning underwear became symbolic of an eternal grief. But even grief had rules. Mourning bloomers were sewn from black cotton. Corsets were covered in crepe. The empire watched its queen mourn through her clothing, never through her tears. And so the underwear became the unspoken language of the royal body. It told stories the crown would never confess. Corsets were not merely fashion. They were instruments. Bones of whalebone or steel, drawn tighter each year. They dictated posture, movement, breath. Women royal are not fated, not from delicacy, but from suffocation. And yet the tighter the corset, the greater the virtue. They said. In the court of Buckingham, young princesses were laced in from childhood. Alexandra, wife of Edward VII, was praised for her slender waist and her silence. But silence, too, was sewn in place. The more restricted the body, the more controlled the woman. The closer the laces, the fewer the questions. Yet the secrets were there. Even then, even beneath the petticoats and drawers. At Balmoral, rumors whispered of Victoria's weight gain and the loosening of her corsets in later years. Royal tailors adjusted in silence. Ladies of the chamber learned to never comment, never hesitate, because in a world where royal underwear defined a woman's worth, admitting that it no longer fit meant more than fabric, it meant failure. The control extended beyond Victoria. Throughout the empire, colonial rulers issued mandates about modest dress for native women, mimicking the corseted modesty of the queen. The symbolism was clear: control your women, and you control your world. And while Victoria's subjects saw only the layered silhouette of virtue, the reality was far more complicated. Victoria adored Albert. Their letters burned with desire. In one she wrote, "How I long to clasp you in my arms again." Yet in public, she was the image of restraint. What covered her body became a mask for what stirred within. The queen bore 9 children. She hated pregnancy, hated the loss of control. She wrote that she felt like a cow, yet she endured wearing maternity corsets designed not for comfort, but to maintain the illusion of order. The illusion that even in pregnancy, the royal body was perfect, but what is hidden always finds a way to surface. In 1893, a fire broke out at Windsor Castle. Amid the chaos, a locked drawer in the Queen's dressing chamber was nearly lost. Inside, love letters and several pairs of well-worn silk bloomers, monogrammed, patched at the seams, no longer the symbols of power, but of personhood. The empire saw only a throne, but behind closed doors, amid linen and lace, there lived a woman who laughed, wept, and bled like any other. And in her underwear, that most intimate armor, she left behind not just secrets, but truth. The royal wardrobe was never silent. It rustled with whispered shame. It creaked with pain. It held stories too dangerous for the history books. Beneath the stiff gowns and glittering brooches, the underwear of queens became repositories of what could not be spoken: disease, desire, disobedience. No one knew this better than Princess Alice, Victoria's 3rd child. Known for her sensitivity and intelligence, Alice also suffered endlessly. From her earliest years, she was corseted tightly both physically and emotionally. Her undergarments were tailored with extra padding to disguise the curvature of her spine. Scoliosis, they murmured in court. But to admit that a royal body was less than perfect? Impossible. Instead, her corsets did the work. They straightened what nature curved, but they also bruised, internally and externally. Her diaries reveal agony hidden beneath formal smile sores at her ribs, difficulty breathing, bouts of faintness dismissed as female weakness. By the time she married Louis of Hesse, Alice was already brittle, physically and emotionally. Her bloomers were sewn with hidden pockets, not for love letters, but for pain-relieving sachets of crushed lavender and laudanum. Small, desperate attempts to soften a life shaped by expectations. Her health declined rapidly after childbirth. 5 pregnancies in 6 years. The doctors insisted she rest, but rest was for lesser women, not for princesses. One morning, a maid discovered blood-stained petticoats in the laundry, more than usual. Silent glances passed between servants. The palace physician was called. Discreetly, Alice had developed a uterine prolapse. The result of repeated pregnancies, insufficient recovery time, and the constant wear of restrictive corsets. But nothing could be made public. No headlines would speak of it. The court simply adjusted her dresses, added extra layers. Her underwear was modified, again tighter, with a hidden harness sewn into the waistband to support what her body could no longer hold. She endured in silence until death finally gave her release in 1878, after contracting diphtheria from one of her children. She was 35, but even in death, her secrets were managed. Her burial clothes were handpicked by her mother. Nothing of her suffering was mentioned. The blood-stained corsets were burned. Elsewhere in the palace, another woman wore lace lined with defiance. Alexandra of Denmark, Princess of Wales, entered the British royal family like a song, elegant, slender, demure. But Alexandra had her own burdens to bear. A childhood illness left her with a permanent limp. To compensate, her corsets were asymmetrical. One side padded more heavily to create the illusion of symmetry. Her bloomers, however, told another story. She adored fashion silk, lace, satin, velvet. She ordered custom pieces from Paris, often with intricate embroidery and hidden messages. A pair survives today at the Museum of London, delicately stitched with violets and the initials A.E. These were not the garments of a demure princess. They were declarations, and beneath them, Alexandra hid a secret far more personal. She suffered from chronic rheumatism and neuralgia. Pain pulsed through her limbs. At public events, she often stood perfectly still, praised for her grace, but in truth, motionless because movement ignited fire in her joints. Her corsets were lined with velvet not for luxury, but to ease the constant pain. Still, she smiled. Still, she performed. But she was not silent. She became increasingly controlling over her wardrobe, selecting fabrics and undergarments not just for comfort, but to reclaim some fragment of autonomy. A rebellion stitched in silk. And then, of course, there was Bertie, Albert Edward. The Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, was infamous for his affairs, and his lovers knew his preferences in every detail, including what lay beneath. One mistress, Lily Langtry, recalled how the prince admired women who wore the French-style, open crotch, bloomers, delicate lace, easy to remove. In letters between them, he described his distaste for prudish cotton drawers and praised her taste in underthings. It was scandalous. And it was known. Alexandra knew. She maintained her dignity, even as gossip columns dissected her husband's affairs. But she too had her symbols. She stopped ordering plain black mourning underwear after Victoria's death, choosing instead pale blue silk trimmed with white lace. A quiet departure from mourning. A signal she was still alive. Still herself. Still capable of making choices, even in a world determined to make her invisible. Beneath layers of duty and expectation, royal underwear was never just cloth. It was medicine. It was rebellion. It was mourning. It was seduction. It was shame. At a time when the female body was viewed as both sacred and scandalous, the undergarments of royal women carried the full weight of a world built to control them. Even young royal girls were not spared. From age 4 or 5, they were trained to wear corset stays, light at first, but slowly increasing in rigidity. Doctors warned of deformed ribs and organ displacement, but these warnings were ignored. A slender waist was the emblem of virtue and control. No matter the cost, servants and ladies-in-waiting were instructed in the art of the perfect lace. How to cinch tightly without bruising too visibly. How to tie knots that could be loosened without noise if a princess began to faint. How to handle blood-stained drawers during menstruation without drawing attention. Everything was measured. Everything was managed. The secrecy was so complete that when Queen Victoria died in 1901, her will included explicit instructions for her burial underwear. She was to be dressed in white. She was to wear her wedding veil. And tucked beneath her bodice was to be a plaster cast of Prince Albert's hand, along with a lock of his hair, and a photograph of John Brown, the controversial Scottish attendant, who had remained her most trusted companion after Albert's death. These relics were placed there by her maid, under orders but in secret. The underwear she wore in death told a final story of love, grief, and quiet defiance. Of a queen who had never been allowed to speak her truth in life, but who, in death, chose to carry her secrets beneath the lace, because no matter how heavy the crown, what lay closest to the skin was always more revealing. They say history is written by those who wear the crown, but some stories are sewn, not written, and the threads run deeper than parchment. Beneath the velvet thrones and marble monuments of the Victorian era lay an empire of cotton, silk, and steel. While the world spoke of empire and progress, of trains and telegrams and industry, women moved silently beneath it all, their bodies shaped, literally, by expectations stitched in every fold of their underclothes. The influence of royal underwear extended far beyond the palace gates. When Queen Victoria popularized modesty, the nation followed. Bloomers became billowy, petticoats multiplied, corsets cinched tighter. Dress reformers pleaded with doctors, citing fainting epidemics and reproductive health issues, but they were met with laughter. Ladies are delicate, they said. That delicacy was not natural, it was engineered. Women began to speak up. Some quietly, through subversion. Others boldly, through protest. In 1851, at the height of the Victorian obsession with tight lacing, a group of London seamstresses began crafting looser, reform-style corsets for themselves and select clients. Women who could no longer breathe under the weight of bone and wire. These corsets didn't sell in shops. They were passed quietly from hand to hand, like contraband. By 1873, Amelia Bloomer, an American activist inspired by both feminism and function, had introduced the bloomer pant to the public, though it was mocked mercilessly. In England, the garment was called ridiculous, unwomanly, scandalous. Yet slowly, among the educated daughters of aristocrats, bloomers began to whisper their presence under skirts. Even some royals took notice. Princess Louise, Queen Victoria's sixth child, had an artist's soul and a rebel spirit. She was known to wear slightly altered undergarments, bloomers cut for ease of movement, looser stays that allowed her to sketch and sculpt. Rumors swirled that she sympathized with women's rights advocates, though nothing was ever confirmed. Still, her choices trickled downward. A lady's maid reported in a private letter that the princess favors garments of practicality beneath her evening gowns, as though such choices were crimes. In truth, they were revolutions. Each piece of royal underwear became a quiet battleground of comfort versus conformity, of pain versus performance. And as the empire stretched across continents, it exported not only goods and governance, but values. British modesty, Victorian morality. A very particular vision of the female body, controlled, hidden, fragile. India, South Africa, the Caribbean. Colonial administrators brought European corsetry to local elites, and the ripple effect was devastating. Indigenous fabrics were replaced by British cotton. Native clothing, once loose and breathable, was stiffened to civilize the body. Corsets became a symbol not just of gendered control, but of imperialism itself. Back in England, cracks were forming. By the late 1890s. Women's colleges were advocating for undergarments that allowed movement. Bicycles became symbols of liberation. And with them came the need for more practical clothing. Corsets began to loosen. Bloomers began to win. Even the royal household could not entirely resist. Princess Maud of Wales, later Queen of Norway, was photographed in what appeared to be a soft-bone corset, her waist not cinched to extremes, but shaped gently. It was radical in its quietness, but change was slow. Too slow for every woman who loosened her stays, 10 more tightened theirs. The power of appearances still loomed large. And for the royals, ever watched, ever judged, the risks of deviation were enormous, which is why the secret stayed hidden. Drawers stained by monthly blood. Corsets altered to support collapsing organs. Petticoats weighted to mask pregnancy. Lace sewn to disguise scars. And in the shadows, whispered stories of royal daughters forced into corsets at age 3, of queens who gave birth wearing stays, so tightly bound that they tore when labor began. Of handmaids sewing extra padding into the undergarments of aging monarchs, not out of respect, but to keep up the illusion of youth. Even death did not always end the performance. In 1901, Queen Victoria was buried in her finest white underthings, but what was hidden beneath them spoke more loudly than silk ever could. The locket with John Brown's picture, the plaster cast of Prince Albert's hand, the secrets she dared not wear above her heart in life, finally laid against her skin in death. Her body, even in its stillness, defied the silence. Today, we rarely think of underwear as history, but in truth, there are few garments more honest. They carry the shape of pain and the outline of longing. They remember the truth long after memory fades. Museums now display royal corsets in drawers. Behind glass, ironies abound. What was once hidden, secret, shameful, is now studied, admired, even celebrated. But the story they tell is not just one of fabric, it is one of control, of resistance, of women who bore the weight of empire, not just on their heads, but on their hips, their spines, their WOMBS. A history not written in blood or gold, but in lace and bone. So next time you see a royal portrait, remember, beneath the jewels, beneath the gowns, beneath the practiced smiles, there was a woman, and her secrets were stitched in silk. If this story stirred something within, if you felt the weight of those secrets beneath the lace, then we invite you to uncover more with us. Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more hidden royal histories. Like if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, because behind every crown, there's a corset. And every corset has a story.